congratulate and to thank Deputy Chief Mike Federico, as this is his last board meeting, and recognize his incredible service and achievement over an extraordinary 45-year career with the Toronto Police Service. Deputy Federico's career has been diverse and remarkable in so many ways. He is currently in charge of Community Safety Command, which comprises 3 core functions: Area Field Command, Central Field Command, and Divisional Policing Support Unit. But he's particularly recognized for his commitment to always working with the community and his dedication as a lifelong learner. Deputy Federico represented the Toronto Police Service and has on many occasions, locally, provincially, and nationally, on numerous provincial and federal committees working to improve public safety. As many of you know, Deputy Federico has a particular focus on the area of mental health, which is an issue of huge priority for the service and the board. In fact, Deputy Federico has become a somewhat renowned and extremely respected expert in this critical field. His work in this area has been consistently inclusive, working with the community to ensure the hugely important partnerships between the police and the public. The board is absolutely grateful to Deputy Federico for his critical role in working on the board's mental health subcommittee since its inception in 2009. And he's brought a wealth of outstanding judgment, knowledge, and a considered approach to a number of very important issues over the years, and been instrumental in bringing about significant change in mental health training in the MCIT program, amongst other initiatives. Throughout his career, Deputy Chief Federico has embodied what the Toronto Police Service stands for, and its founding principles and its ever-important core values. And as many have remarked, I think it's going to be difficult, Mike, to imagine the service without you going forward. But be assured that Mike Federico is one of those police officers who really, truly cares about the service to the city. We heard it, Mike, in your interview on Metro Morning a couple of days ago. That extraordinary sense of service and contribution, but cares about policing in Toronto and the excellence of policing in Toronto. So be assured that when Mike leaves, his legacy certainly will remain in so many varied parts of this organization. His focus on making sure that we have the right systems and approaches, the right governance, and the partnerships that are important to making sure we have excellence in policing. So, Deputy Federico, Mike, on behalf of the board, we want to wish you just a great, healthy, happy, prosperous retirement to you, and Debbie, and the family. And we want to thank you for such incredible leadership, vision, and guidance over a huge number of years. And thank you for your great contribution. We also have another person who's going to have the last final meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board, and I want to thank her, Dr. Nuria, because this is her last meeting today. And Dr. Nuria, who was appointed by the province in December 2010, has an extraordinary, impressive career in the medical field and a renowned commitment to community. She's made an invaluable contribution to this board. She's been an active and tireless member, committing hundreds and hundreds of hours, not only to the board meetings, but to committee meetings, and particularly in the area of mental health, where we've worked a great deal together. Throughout her time here, Dr. Nuria has always brought a perceptive and a compassionate lens to issues and challenges that we face. She's asked the important questions that need to be raised, again, particularly around the area of mental health, and working on the groups there and talking about the importance of our members suffering from PTSD and the assistance and support that is vital to the modernization of the Toronto Police Service. Her decisions are always based on principles and on thoughtful, informed analysis. So, Dr. Nuria, we are also going to miss you greatly. I've tremendously enjoyed working with you. I was appointed after you in 2011, but we've worked together now for 6 years. And it's, I know your extraordinary commitment and passion to this. So I want to thank you on behalf of your colleagues in the City of Toronto for all you've done for the Toronto Police Services Board, and wish you every success going forward. And Mayor Tory?
Well, I have here, Mr. Chair, a small token of the appreciation of City Council and myself as the Mayor, which really says many of the same things that the Chair just so eloquently said. I'll note it's dated on May the 23rd, 2017, because we had thought that would be the time of your last meeting, but I guess the appointments process sort of intervened, and we got the benefit of having you here with us for another few months. But I just want to say, as the Chair said, thank you for the many contributions you make to the community in your professional life as well, but you made a contribution here to the community through helping with policing, and I think the board and the police service are the better for your service. And as I said to you earlier today, your interventions are perhaps less frequent than some of the rest of us who are in public life, which is a lesson for us, but they were always very meaningful and very thoughtful, and we appreciate that very much, and I'll just give you that as a small token of our appreciation. Thanks.
You may.
I see that Deputy Federico just said it was a privilege, but I'm going to say more than that, if I may.
You may.
So what I'd like to basically say is that serving on the Toronto Police Services Board has been a very distinct honor and privilege for me, particularly as the role of governance involves ensuring the safety of the citizens of Toronto. To the extraordinary men in blue, men and women in blue, you not only serve and protect us, but are even willing to lay down your lives in the line of duty. Now, I remember very vividly, within days of being appointed to this board, it was a wintry day, and a day where Sergeant Ryan Russell, a 35-year-old father of a 2-year-old son, was one such hero. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and the men and women in blue, you would remember that Sergeant Ryan Russell was struck down by a stolen snowplow in January of 2011, and that was just a few weeks after my appointment. He had laid down his life to serve and protect us. This tragic memory of a police hero still lives with me and is forever etched in my mind. Now, Chief Saunders, you are right here, and I think no one has a more difficult job than you in this place. Not only do you serve and protect us, but during your tenure, we have undergone the largest transformation in the history of Toronto Police Service. Chief, you have taken on this challenge and have personally gone out to all the units. You've tried to talk to your unit members, allay their fears, and to personally hear out their concerns and begin implementation. And we have heard from February, we've heard it in May, we've heard it very recently, the progress that's made, and this is certainly not an easy task, and we thank you, Chief. To my colleagues on the board, under the leadership of Chair Pringle, have gone where no police board has dared to go before, with bold and innovative path to excellence, 32 recommendations to modernize the service, all within well-defined timelines and outcomes. We have already seen some of the early successes, Mr. Chair, and marching forward to modernize the service. So congratulations to Chair Pringle, Chief Saunders, and the TTF team. Now, the board staff, we wouldn't be able to do anything without them. So to the board staff, you're superb, professional, helpful, efficient, and are ready to provide institutional memory to all the new members as they come along. So thank you very much. Thank you, Joanne, Sandy, Ethelene, Sherry, and Deirdre, who is not here but has served many years on the service. So, and she's enjoying her much-earned retirement. Carl, who sits in front of me, thank you very much for providing legal advice and framework within which we could perform our duties. Thank you, Carl. Now, to members of the public who come here month after month to advocate on behalf of people or a special cause, please note that you are also appreciated for your dedication and giving your voice. Okay.
Assaulted by a police officer, and she's trying to get Andy Pringle to go downstairs and speak to her because she's being prevented from coming into this meeting. A black woman who represents community is being downstairs detained and can't come into this meeting, has called up here repeatedly for Mr. Pringle to come downstairs, and yet she's being prevented from coming into this meeting, this public meeting in this city-owned building. Why is that happening? If you appreciate the community.
Okay. Let me just address the. Let me just address the issue of public safety. May I speak, please? We've heard from you. Let me just address the issue of the security downstairs. We are all aware of the need for increased security in institutions around the world. We hear time and again of threats and terrorist threats. No one is permitted from coming in. No one is permitted from coming into this building to attend, but it is the responsibility of the chief of police to ensure public safety. And so people are wanted as they are going into courthouses, and I suggest that this is something that is coming in areas right across the area of public service. Again, there is no impediment to access. There is merely a requirement to make sure that people, that the chief guarantee the public safety is maintained. So thank you for that input. I'm sorry, Dr. Nuria, you've been here. Sorry, Councillor Lee, you had something you wish to say?
Can I just finish?
Yeah, sorry.
So I want to again thank you for giving your voice to a fellow man and those less fortunate. That was the point I was trying to make. So lastly, to my colleagues on the board, I have learned a lot from you and enjoyed my time on the board. And one thing I must say, and it's for all, that the current board under Andy, John, Shelley, Marie, Ken, and Chin have focused on what's the right thing to do and not what's the popular thing to do. And Mr. Mayor, I know that you talk about this a lot, and I'm personally carrying on this as a mantra in my life. So thank you very much, and thank you to one and all.
Thank you, Dr. Nuria. Councillor Lee?
I'm going to raise a point of privilege, and I was just downstairs, and is it possible to, because Ms. Renee is supposed to be deputating here, is it possible to expedite that, allow her to come up here to deputate? I'm requesting the chief to...
That's not cool. She needs to be here.
That's what I'm saying, expedite. Expedite her bringing up here. That's what I'm saying. Expedite her coming up here. That's why I'm asking for it. I don't know what you're... It's not cool.
I know.
Right, but what's he going on about? So, just a request.
She's in a danger.
He's on your side. Why don't we have the conversation? Yeah.
Thank you.
Chief Saunders?
I'm on your side.
Thank you.
I'm not disallowing anyone to come to headquarters. Everybody is invited to headquarters. In order to come into headquarters, there are some rules that have to be complied with. We've spoken on the national security piece over and over again. This is nothing new. I don't know why people are surprised that places are being screened more scrupulously. People need to understand that law enforcement is a target when it comes to national security. As chief of police, I take that seriously. This building is a police building, and as such, we want people to come in. However, there are certain procedures that have to take place in order for people to come in. So it's not denying access. If the language here is that we're denying access, we are not denying access in any way, shape, or form.
I would also point out that this is the third or fourth month Chief Saunders, that those have been in place?
Yes, it is, and it's also, to be aware, the person we're talking about came through last month.
Well, Councillor Lee, I may just turn this over to you. If she wants to speak with me, I'm happy to go down and talk to her. If you want to take over the chair.
I'll take over here.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Ms. Pringle. Okay, I'm going to go back and go through the points. Number 3, I'm going to hold it for presentation. Okay, number 3 is a motion. All right, confirmation of minutes. Do I get a motion to move? Yes. Dr. Neria and Ms. Morena. All those in favor? Any opposed? Oh. Okay. There is also an amendment to number 3 as well. Confirmation of minutes from the meeting that was held on August 24th, 2017. Motion that the board amend minute number P19-5/17, request for special fund beyond the blue Toronto chapter to indicate that this report was referred to the chief rather than deferred. Move the motion, Mayor Tory, seconder, Ms. Molina. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 4, hold for deputation. Number 5 to number 5.1 to 5.8. Okay, we got a hold for deputation for 5. Yeah, 5.1. Yeah, all of 5 until the, and then we go through it later. Item 6, deputation as well, so I'll hold that. Number 7, respond to a jury recommendation from the coroner's inquest in the death of Mr. David Andrew Dosset, hold for deputation. Number 8, special constable appointment, UC of Toronto. Do I get a Mr. Mayor, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 9, special constables, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, increase in approved strength. There's deputation, hold for that. Number 10, recommendations for payment of legal indemnification, case number 2089-17, hold for deputation. Number 11, Ergo Industries Seating Systems, vendor of record. Can I get, you can move it? Councillor Carroll, seconder, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 12, speed measuring devices, vendor of record. Any holds? If none, can somebody move it? Councillor Carroll, Mayor Tory, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 13, vendor of record for facial recognition system. Any holds? None. Can somebody move it, please? Marie Molina and Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 16, no, coming back. I thought there were others as well. I don't see it there. So I got to go back to my agenda here, which was been updated just now. Number 14, that is our TPSB monthly statistical briefing. Yeah, I'm going to be holding for presentation. This is part of the way forward recommendation 17. So I'll read that later. So they hold for presentation. Number 15, business case for uniformed staff detective sergeant, sergeant detectives and civilian promotions. Okay. Well, by Councillor Carroll. Number 16, appointment of a special constable to relieve traffic congestion. There's a letter from Mayor Tory. I think we need to introduce it first, do we? Add it to agenda. Mayor Tory, any seconder for that? Dr. Noria, all those in favor, adding it? Any opposed? Seeing none, added.
We're just adding it to the agenda.
Adding it to the agenda, not approving yet. I'll let Mayor Tory do the speaking later on, so we hold for the Mayor Tory. So now we go back to the health items. Okay, we're going to do number 14 first. She's telling me what to do, all right? Thanks, Colleen. So we will do for the first time TPSB monthly statistical briefing. So can I have staff come up and now before we do that, this is part of the way forward recommendation 17. It's a monthly statistical briefing and is intended to contribute to improving the public understanding of policing, improve transparency, and enhance confidence through the sharing of public safety information. Within this briefing is a city-wide overview of statistical indicators, year-over-year comparisons, and most recent monthly geographical mapping of mental health-related calls for service, mental health apprehensions, violent crimes, traffic tickets, collisions, and fatalities, and administrative information. This has been vetted through almost a whole year of making sure that this is the kind of data that I believe the public will want ongoing. So this is the first of continuous monthly updates. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ian Williams. I'm the Manager of Business Intelligence Analytics, and today we're delivering this presentation as part of the Way Forward. As Councillor Lee mentioned, this is part of our modernization plan. And for recommendation number 17, this is a key piece of delivering increasingly accessible and transparent information to the public. The purpose of which is increasing or enhancing the understanding of policing in Toronto and to increase transparency within that. The Toronto Police Service is a data-driven organization, and as such, the information that we're presenting today is part of what our organization uses on an ongoing basis to evaluate programs and to enable decision-making across the entire organization. So this briefing is a key piece of our information management strategy moving forward to provide accurate and timely information to the public as well as members of the Toronto Police Service so that we're able to make decisions and discuss public safety related challenges in Toronto using the same information on the same platform, effectively giving us the same forum to discuss these major challenges. And so today, as well as for each monthly meeting moving forward, the business intelligence team will provide this briefing, either myself or another member of the team, to deliver those statistical indicators, trends, and geographic patterns across the city for public safety topics, including calls for service, mental health, administration, and traffic safety related topics. So on Friday of last week, the Police Services Board released this as a news issue, and the Toronto Police Service provided it today as a news release, which was issued to give the public access to the online version of this presentation. So it is up and available currently in exactly the same format that you're looking today. This is literally, I accessed this from our public safety data portal, which is a piece of recommendation 17, as well as some of our key information tools such as the community asset portal that speak to our ability to deliver more timely and accurate information to the public. And so moving forward with the presentation, we'll begin by discussing a number of key items which move from month to month. So what we'll be presenting is a year-to-date to the end of August. So as we're discussing these items, keep in mind that this every month will be a year-to-date presentation of these topics. And what we've included here, in addition to the data, the trends, and spatial patterns, on either side of this sheet, you'll see a number of definitions of the terms that we're providing. And this is increasingly important for us to enable a conversation at the same table discussing the same topics. So some of these are very operational terms that you'll notice, some acronyms, which we subsequently describe not only in the columns here on each page, but in a glossary at the end, so that we are literally talking about the same topics. And so what we have on our first slide are calls for service, looking at a year-over-year trend from 2015 to 2016 to 2017, year to date. And for both emergency and non-emergency calls, there's been very little change compared especially to this time last year. So a small increase in emergency calls, as well as a small decrease in non-emergency calls, resulting ultimately in very little change compared to this time last year. So we see relative to that, the time that officers have spent on those calls is relatively equal to where it was this time last year as well. Into the middle of this slide, we see tickets, which are presented in two data sets. So one being warnings that have been issued related to traffic infractions, as well as the issued tickets, often which involve fines as well. So our warnings have decreased year over year compared to 2016 by about 22%. And we've had a decrease in tickets issued by approximately 1%. So relatively equal to where we were last year. In terms of arrests, 2016 compared to 2017 is relatively equal as well. There's been about a 2% decrease for arrests related to the Criminal Code or Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, CDSA. So moving to our next slide, we also changed topics a little bit into the mental health area. And these are calls for service for which officers have been dispatched to year to date across those subject areas where members of the public have called to indicate a number of challenges that are within a mental health crisis category. So those calls have increased this year so far by about 5% compared to last year. And in all of our categories, aside from one, we've seen that increase consistently. And looking not only on a year-over-year basis, but also a month-by-month basis, we're seeing the volume of calls that the Toronto Police Service is receiving related to persons in a mental health crisis. It's increasing on an ongoing basis. And so far this year, it's only by about 5%, but over the past 3 years, we've seen that growing at about a rate of 10% per year. And that not only increases month over month, but also year over year. So we're seeing that trend increasing on an ongoing basis, representing a much higher volume of work for members of the Toronto Police Service in responding to this. We've translated that same data into a 1-month snapshot. So our map that you can see here is the spatial representation of just the month of August. So where there was approximately 2,500 calls for service related to mental health crisis, where officers had attended, that averages roughly to 81 per day, calls where officers are attending this type of event across the city. Now we can see spatially there's a large clustering downtown. So we see the core has a higher volume than elsewhere in the city, but it's, thanks Miguel. But we also see this trend following a spatial pattern throughout the city as well, which is quite evident here. So related, mental health apprehensions. So primarily Section 17 of the Mental Health Act, which defines a police officer's authority to apprehend someone who's a danger to themselves or others. Those have increased as well, about 5% compared to last year. And again, we're seeing this on a month-over-month as well as year-over-year basis. So again, representing that higher volume of demand. And we're going to move now to again, the spatial representation of this, but also the average per day. And this is incredibly interesting because for, I think, a lot of public view on this topic, where we just looked at the number of calls that officers have been dispatched to, about 81 per day, here we're seeing approximately 28 apprehensions per day, which says there's about 50 of these calls that officers attending that aren't resulting in an apprehension. So there's another resolution that's addressed through this. And there's a lot of work that the Toronto Police Service is doing with partners as well. We've got teams such as the Mobile Crisis Intervention Team, which specialize in this topic. So there's a lot of interesting discussion around the difference between those two numbers. However, we do see the spatial pattern is the same. So across the city, we see a high volume downtown of apprehensions as well, which is consistent with those calls, as well as spatial patterns throughout the city. So moving on to the discussion of violent crime related subjects, homicides in Toronto are down this year compared to last year, with about 18 fewer than there were this time, and that's across all categories. So we're seeing fewer homicides related to shootings, stabbings, and other categories. In terms of shootings, we're down this year in the volume of shootings as well as the number of shooting victims by approximately 8%. So we're seeing that in the shooting category as well as the homicide category. Spatial pattern across the city, we see a wide array of locations. However, clusterings in central east, the core, as well as northwest parts of the city. Related to that subject, which speaks to enforcement, investigation, and collection of evidence, firearm seizures have increased this year by about 15% compared to last year. That's largely in the long guns, so rifles and shotguns, as well as handgun categories. It's important to note that approximately 39%, or nearly 2 in 5 of every firearm that's seized, are handguns. Stabbings in the city have also decreased this year compared to last year by about 2% in terms of the number of occurrences, as well as approximately 5% in terms of the number of victims. Looking at the relationship between victims and attackers in those stabbing-related occurrences, there's a number of categories that indicate the nature of those occurrences. Approximately 41%, the attacker and victim were not known to each other. 15% were domestic partner relative related. 22% were acquaintances. And 22% there wasn't enough information to make a determination as to the relationship between those individuals. The spatial pattern of stabbing occurrences across the city, again, this is the month of August, where we see clustering to some extent in the downtown core and sporadic elsewhere across the city. Moving on to the traffic topic, total collisions this year is down compared to last year. There's a decrease of approximately 8% total collisions. And within that category, there's been a decrease also in property damage, collisions involving an injury, as well as fail to remain collisions. And we're seeing that as a very positive message that's come out of enhanced focus around traffic safety, Vision Zero, and partnerships that are existing between Toronto Police and the City of Toronto in that regard. I would also note there's a number of these slides that have information that today is available as open data or in public-facing dashboards or interactive tools on our public safety data portal. This is one of those slides that has a lot of information today that's available publicly. Traffic fatalities are down notably compared to this time last year, 39 year to date, which is approximately a 28% decrease compared to this time last year. Of note within the fatalities that have occurred so far this year, and this is consistent across many years over time, approximately 50%, often slightly more than 50%, involve persons who are 65 plus. And additionally, and related to that, it's the same category of individuals, those people are crossing mid-block. So there's not at an intersection, not where there's a crosswalk of any sort. So literally those intersections where it's a mid-block fatality of a pedestrian who's crossing, essentially jaywalking. The spatial pattern, it's a little bit hard to see on this, one, because there's only a few occurrences that took place in the month of August, but also because this topic tends not to have high clustering of occurrences throughout the city. So there aren't several particular intersections where there are fatalities because of collisions or pedestrians or cyclists, for example. So this is a topic that you need a lot of data, many years of data, to identify strategic trends where enforcement or awareness or changes to infrastructure around intersections can be made. And again, on that topic specifically is where the partnership between the Toronto Police and the City of Toronto related to Vision Zero is so critical. Moving more into administrative related information, this slide demonstrates number of SIU cases as well as internal and external complaints. So comparing 2017 to 2016, there's been a decrease in the number of SIU investigations. In our bottom left-hand chart, we see our internal complaints. You'll notice that in between June and July of this year, there's a notable increase. That was an internal policy decision that was made regarding the speed of our vehicles and flagging for a unit level investigation, which in this case is documented as an internal complaint pertaining to any vehicle that's traveled in excess of 150 kilometers an hour. So that results in an instant internal complaint where there's follow-up at the unit level to determine the reason for that speed. And so that spiked. We expect that that will probably decrease to some extent and then continue at a flat line at some point. Our external complaints are, you'll notice they change month over month, so you're not going to see a trend in terms of any particular month being high compared to previous years. That's more of an administrative interchange between the Toronto Police Service and the OIPRD. So complaints that are received via the OIPRD and come to the Toronto Police Service. And we see that more as an administrative process where some months there'll be more submitted than others. And that this year compared to last year's year to date is virtually identical to where it was last year. Absenteeism, so again on the administration topic, we're noticing both uniform and civilian absenteeism trends are increasing year over year. And this has been a trend over the past 3 years. It's important to note that the absenteeism rate at the Toronto Police Service is low relative to a lot of other public sector comparable organizations. And we would see that federal public service broadly, as well as other city agencies. The Toronto Police Service is notably low compared to that. However, there is an increasing trend year over year. Summary statistics, so just looking broadly at a lot of the documented reports that are collected, so dispatch calls for service, general occurrences, arrests, tickets, and SIU cases. So we've provided that as an overall summary, really representing a volume of work. And that's our last slide in this case. One of the key messages that we really want to get across on this is we use this information on an ongoing basis to support the decisions of the organization. And we do that largely because you've noticed the format of many of these. There's a lot of mapping involved. There's a lot of trends. Where were we this period compared to last period? And we break that down internally to the units that are responsible geographically or administratively for particular topics. And this is largely done for three key purposes. One is to address the complex needs of a city like Toronto. The second is to focus on partnerships, because there's many challenges that you'll recognize that aren't the Toronto Police Services alone. And so recognizing that there are areas where we can embrace partnerships and use this information again to talk about common challenges, we do that. And of course, ultimately and geographically, I love mapping, so maps show up a lot. And we do that to be where the public needs us most. And presenting information in a spatial format, which most people can connect with to some extent, we find that to be a crucial decision-enabling support. And so we'll be presenting this, as we mentioned, on an ongoing basis. It's available publicly now and will continue to be available. And we're striving for a continuous improvement environment. So we're using this information on an ongoing basis and moving towards more real-time decision support using this. So we're very happy to have presented this, and we look forward to feedback as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Mr. Jeffers, go ahead.
Thank you for that report. Now, based on what you've rightly said, that you're embracing partnerships as, in terms of trying to rectify situations in policing and so forth. Is there a reason why race-based statistics are not part of this, where community groups especially can determine where there's great need, and also they can argue about for additional resources to deal with this in the interest of the safety of the city as well? Is there a reason for us not doing that?
So I'll put that squarely within the objective to continuously improve. And so what you'll see, although they're not here today, you will very shortly see those pertaining to the regulated interactions. Those will come in this same format. So we're providing those very publicly to the board and to public, and that will be open data as well. And that will include race-based statistics, absolutely. As well, we're in discussions, and I'll defer to Deputy Federico on this subject more specifically, but use of force as well.
Yeah, because supplementary to that, I'm just going to say that the whole question of race-based statistics, right? Where as you've pointed out, criminal activity may be down or violence may be down, but in some communities it may be up considerably. And so, I would like to see us capture that, so that we can advise communities where there's a prevalence of, say, violence, and so that and we can advise granting bodies to allocate appropriate resources to manage that.
Ms. Molyneux? Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Jeffers, the board of the day created the policy to not collect race-based data. So this is a new narrative, new dialogue, new time, and we are working on figuring out some sort of agreement to make the appetite for information to the public is something that we are trying to increase. As you can see, the amount of portals that we have opened up, the amount of relationships we've had with City Hall in sharing of information, and its raw data, as well as the presentations that we have here. This is for the purpose of giving just a general overview, but people have the ability of extracting more. But that race component is something that we need to discuss to revisit the board policy, so that we can make those changes. So it's not because we're being resistant. I don't think we ever have been resistant, but we need that guidance in order to move to that level.
Go ahead now, Ms. Molnar.
No, I thank you for that, Chief. I just think that, you know, I would like to pursue that, you know, as, you know, board meetings as they come up, because I think it's really important that we factor that into our report and statistics.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Molnar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I'm a bit of a map geek, so I really share your excitement for the data, and especially presenting it in a map format. I think it just is so visible for those of us who are sighted. So a couple of things. I'm thinking about, because it's the first time I've actually gone to the portal is right now, and I'm seeing that when you do that as a member of the public, you have some options, and perhaps this will tie to Mr. Jeffers' observations, perhaps others. I'm wondering if when you come back on a regular basis, because this will be part of a monthly presentation, you could start to show us how we can play with the data options that are available, and whether there are ways for the public to actually input data that would then allow us to see this is what the public are seeing, this is what the service is seeing. It won't necessarily tell a story, but it will start to create a dialogue around where people are starting to use the maps for their own community information purposes. And I'd like to hear, because I can't tell from looking at this, what you thought the that interface with the public, because you mentioned engagement, so I assume that that's part of it. Mike, what you saw, what you envision that kind of engagement being. And then I have one other question.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'd be happy to spend some more time with the open data portal. I think we'd be happy to demo it, give some insight as to what the public can use it for, as well as where it's going, because it's not in a final state. It will be subject to continuous improvement and change over time, so input from the public will be critical in that regard.
And that ties to my second question, which is something that you and I have discussed briefly offline, which is as this information has become better at sharing this information, this kind of information, all the information about what happens inside the police service, there will be questions that are asked. They might come from inside the police service. They probably will come from outside as people start to find it interesting to navigate. Were you thinking about a way of capturing that exchange between the questions that are asked by, for example, members of the public and the answers that you as experts might be able to provide?
I think today the service does a great job through social media, doing a lot of work in that regard. So there could be a mechanism there. I think we could also find potential other avenues to receive and respond to those questions. We'd have to take that away, though.
And I would point out, and Councillor Carroll would know, chairing the budget process, that we do have, I think, a practice that we're putting in place of having all the questions that are asked about the budget, and Mr. Veniciano would know as well, answered. So perhaps there's some practice there that we could adopt as you start to get people engaged in this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Ms. Molnar. Any further questions from any board members? Seeing no questions, before I ask for a motion to receive his report, I'd like to thank Mr. Williams for bringing this forward, and also invite the public to comment on the information that's provided for any continuous improvements, as Mr. Williams was saying. So if you go up there and take a look, much appreciated that for input from the public. So a motion to receive the report, Ms. Molnar, Councillor Carroll, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried.
Thank you.
Now we go to the health items and the deputations. The first health item is number 4, and marijuana arrests, and this was from a letter submitted by Mr. John Sewell. So deputation is from Mr. John Sewell, who is on the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. Former Mayor Joe Sewell, you know the rules, so you got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to begin by saying I resented being searched in order to enter this building. I found it very demeaning, and I think it was demeaning to other people as well. And I think it does this board no service to institute that kind of a practice. And I hope you'll abandon it very, very quickly. I might say that my colleague, because I know him, I've seen him here many, many times, Carl Lagensfield, has refused to consent to the search and is not being allowed in. I think he's a deputant in one of the items. I think somebody should go down and escort him in. He's well known to this board, and this is craziness.
The board is not
to formally talk about a report that was in the Toronto Star some months ago, indicating they've analyzed the data of the Toronto Police Service, but for the years before 2014, indicating that black people are arrested 3 times as more likely than white people for the simple possession of marijuana. All the data indicates that, in fact, blacks don't use marijuana any more frequently than whites do, so it's very clear that what's happening is we have black racism that's happening in the practice of the Toronto Police Service. And this is reprehensible. This is not the kind of conduct that we want to see any public service providing. And there's no reason for thinking that what happened before 2014 is not happening today. We suspect it is. All the data has indicated that this kind of black racism has been taking place, and we have to find a way to stop it. We know that the board has all sorts of policies about racial discrimination, and that's terrific. But what we're talking about here is practice. How do we get the police to stop discriminating against blacks? And I think that, in fact, the board is going to have to take some action to ensure that this does not continue. It's going to be difficult to do it, but I think you have to do it. I think you have to do it probably by starting and saying police officers are not going to be allowed to lay charges against people until that charge is justified by some person, such as a Crown attorney or some independent person. So that you can actually start to say, if we're beginning to arrest too many people of a certain color, then we're going to stop it right away. But I think some kind of action must be set in place to stop this practice. I think it's reprehensible that because of the color of your skin, you're going to be treated differently by the police than other people for something very, very serious, a criminal charge, and perhaps being held without release. So it's very important that you put in place some structures to stop this occurring. It's not a policy, it's going to be a practice. And as I say, I think the only way to do it is to say police are not allowed to lay charges, individual officers, until that charge is justified by somebody else, some person who is a bit more independent. And that's the only way that I can see you stopping that kind of discrimination. And I'd ask the board to consider that kind of a policy and put it in place quickly so that we no longer have this reprehensible behavior. If this behavior happened in any other part of the civil service, people would be furious. And the fact that the police get away with it is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Any questions? Mayor Tory, I saw him putting up his hand first.
Well, Mr. Sewell, thank you. Could I just ask, are you aware, or whether anybody in your organization has done any research on whether there is any kind of a, I'll call it a fail-safe or something along the lines of what you suggested that's in place anywhere else? I mean, I haven't studied other sort of, I guess you want to call it legal and police systems to know whether the police in every case lay the charge or whether there's any kind of a, you know, any kind of a...
Well, I know that in 3 other provinces, Crown attorneys have to approve charges laid by the police. There's two experiments that are now happening in Ontario, one at 51 Division, where that is, there's a Crown lodged in 51 who's checking out those charges. So I think you can say that it is happening elsewhere. I might say that the impact of that is very, very substantial. The number of charges that actually are laid in places like Quebec, where they have this, are 22% less than Ontario. But in fact, the key is what happens to charges when they get to court. In Ontario, something like 44% of all the charges that are laid are withdrawn or dismissed by the court in Ontario, almost half. In Quebec, it's more in the order of 10 or 11%. So it's clear that some kind of monitoring like that can have a very, very strong impact. I don't know if in Quebec or British Columbia or New Brunswick, which are the other three provinces that actually have that kind of monitoring, that monitoring is done in order to ensure that there is no racial prejudice. I don't know whether that's occurring, but it's clear that it could be used in that fashion.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll just mention I'm going to ask the Chief a question after about the 51 and about whether we know the results of these other provinces, because if we don't, it'd be useful to get that information for the board.
I think Mr. Jeffers put up his hand as well.
Mr. Sewell, you know, in view of what you've stated with the anti-black racism that you've acknowledged, and by the way, it's been acknowledged by the City of Toronto, anti-black racism exists, and the province through its anti-racism directorate. Now, what do you see as the role of the Ontario Human Rights Commission in protecting the rights of its citizens and being involved in this whole episode of selective racism?
I certainly think that they can play a very strong role, and you should involve them. But I guess what I'm worried about is that the board will take a position that says, let's get them in to study it and figure out what to do, which is going to take some years. And I think you want some action that can happen right away. So, but I certainly think the Ontario Human Rights Commission has a strong role to play, and they've been very outspoken on these kinds of questions in the past.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffers. Ms. Balmer, I thought that you had your hand up. No? Okay, Councilor Carroll.
So, let me understand. Have you've had only a quick look at how the other provinces do this? Are you not concerned that if we have that extra layer, and we're going to ask this question of the service as well, unless we put a Crown attorney in every division, would it not lead to more detaining while we have a Crown attorney make that determination?
No, you aren't determined. No, I don't think you detain somebody when they haven't had there's no charge laid against them.
Well,
I mean, and
what happens during the period where we're waiting to get the Crown attorney's opinion? I want to understand this, because if it helps, I want to understand how it would work.
So I guess there's two things. One, the Crown attorney is right there on site. That's one thing. Okay?
Okay.
The second thing is, if that's not an appropriate way of getting rid of racial determination, then I think you've got to start figuring out some other way of doing it.
Yeah.
But for too long is all we've had is a policy and haven't had the action. And so I'm just suggesting the kind of thing. I'm not responsible. I'm not a member of the Police Services Board. So, but in fact, you people are responsible for doing that, and this has been left too long. That's one possible way of doing it. I might also say we're dealing with something that is very minor. Possession of marijuana. I mean, you know, this is real. This is not significant. This is not murder or, you know, a crime of violence. So it's you know, so I think one has to be quite clear about that.
So, and one other question, and this is for the coalition, the whole coalition. One of the things that struck me about the article, and I thank you for bringing it, because I had missed this article when it appeared in the Star. It wasn't until you brought it to our attention. I don't know how I missed it when it was published. But be that as it may, now that we're looking at it, what struck me is that, you know, there was a struggle for the newspaper to really collate the data all along the line. Is does the coalition advocate in terms of collecting race-based data? It's not just who do we stop today, but really all along the chain. You want to be you know,
I think so.
bail conditions, et cetera. You're in favor of race-based data all along the chain so that we can really follow not just who is stopped, who is considered for charges, but their path all the way along. How is it different? We would have to be recording it all the way along.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure how far you're going, but the answer at this point is yes. Until we actually have some kind of service where it's clear there is not continual racial discrimination, we have to start doing that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Question of staff, okay. Mayor Tory, go ahead. Oh, there's another deputy? Oh, sorry, yes, Debbie Moran. And one more after that. Mr. Moran, you have 5 minutes, as usual.
Take notice that the Crown is the surety for Mr. Derek Moran, the person I have. And I just want to say, Councillor Lee, I wasn't heckling you back there. That was just my reaction to finding out it was Dion, because I know she's got a bad back. So,
okay.
I just want to start off by saying that by me speaking at this meeting is in no way my consent, express or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And if everything that you guys think is going on downstairs right now with these searches is okay, then why don't you get real police officers to do them? So I was just thinking about people who are most likely to be arrested for smoking or using or possession of marijuana. That they probably don't know about this, but this is from the Sal Haney's Police Manual of Arrest, Seizure, and Interrogation. This is page 117. I'm going to read from the chapter 23, or paragraph 23, consequences of an illegal arrest. An illegal or unlawful arrest by a police officer will constitute a defense to a charge of escaping from lawful custody, assaulting a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty, or obstructing or resisting a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty. The reason for this is that a person cannot be said to have escaped lawful custody unless the officer had lawful authority to place him or her in custody. Similarly, a person cannot be guilty of assaulting a police officer in the lawful execution of his or her duty if the arrest itself was unlawful. Before a person can be said to be obstructing a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty, it must be established by the officer that he or she was, in fact, acting under a duty. That's from Johansson, 1947, the Supreme Court of Canada. Similarly, a person cannot be convicted of resisting a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty unless the officer was acting directly within limits of their powers and duty. If the officer makes an unlawful arrest, then there is a common law right to resist that arrest. That's from Christie versus Lichinsky, 1947, somewhere from the UK. Now, I just want to make it clear, I'm not encouraging anybody to try this because it's probably just going to end up badly for you, you know, considering police have armed and deadly weapons on their hips and everything else. But I'm just pointing out that I'm not quite sure how anyone walking down the street, a police officer arresting them for smoking marijuana or having on them could ever possibly be a lawful arrest, because as I kept on mentioning here, the word person, I don't think many people realize that, but once you sift through the obfuscation, the legalese use of the word include in the criminal code, the definition for person is actually Her Majesty and an organization. So hopefully the new 80 police officers that are hired will be taught how to differentiate between your fellow man, your fellow woman, and Her Majesty and an organization. Plus there's section 32.1 of the Constitution. Mentioned that last time I was here. Peter Hogg's clarification. I've spoken about that with Marco Mendicino, the MP from my area, who's the parliamentary secretary assistant for Attorney General Jodie Wilson-Raybould. That acts and statutes, I know I hate to break this to a lot of people in this room, acts and statutes only apply to government employees. Those who are performing a public function of government, one who is a government actor or those performing government actions. That's why Ontario is a common law jurisdiction where the rules of equity apply, and legal actually only applies to government employees. So I don't think any of these fine, upstanding common law peace officers ever join the force thinking, they join the force thinking, I want to help good people and protect them from bad people, not by arresting their fellow man or woman for smoking a plant that grows out of the ground and being responsible partly for putting them in a cage for a commercial crime in which there's no harm done and there's no injured party. The very beginning of the Constitution, the very first line says, recognize the supremacy of God. And Genesis 9:3 says, I have given you all things, including the green herb. And Romans 2:11 says that God is no respecter of persons, because ultimately, when you break down this legalese gibberish, these acts and statutes always go back to person. And the definition of person is always either a corporation or Her Majesty in an organization, in the case of the City of Toronto, a municipality. So hopefully everyone knows going here in the future, just, you know, comply with section 32.1 of the Constitution, because the rules are being strictly enforced now, right? Because I read that on the police board's website. Just strictly enforce section 32.1 of the Constitution, and this, you know, we'll all get along. And people will go back to, you know, having it out for the police like, you know, it's turned out to be, and things should be okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Any questions of Mr. Moran?
Oh, I do not consent to being referred to as Mr. Councillor Lee.
Okay.
I love you platonically, but no, Mr.
Okay, thank you very much. Next applicant is Jodie Emery. Miss Emery, please. You have 5 minutes to
I'll start my timer.
tell us what you have in your mind.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. And I just want to say those monthly statistical reports, that's incredible. If you haven't had that before, that was very insightful. And I'd like to see more about marijuana and drug arrests and having a breakdown too. I'm here to talk about the respect for the law. I have law enforcement family members. My sister worked as a first responder for 911 and is now Vancouver Police. I have RCMP in my family as well. And I respect the law when it's respectable. And for the vast majority of Canadians, marijuana law enforcement arrests are no longer respectable, and it brings distrust and disrespect towards our law enforcement officers by enforcing these laws. We know from the Toronto Star report, please do read it, that these arrests are racially biased. They target people of color, the poor, minorities, those who are already unfairly treated in our society. And Bill Blair, your former police chief, acknowledged this last year, saying one of the greatest injustices in our country is the racial disparity in the marijuana law enforcement. So right now, I think we can do a great service to our law enforcement and to society by trying to bring back respect towards law enforcement with respect to marijuana law enforcement. In various jurisdictions, including Seattle and a number of U.S. states, Washington, Colorado, California, Hawaii, Missouri, and Arkansas, they have something called lowest law enforcement priority. And this is a priority such that all law enforcement activities related to offenses other than cannabis offenses shall be a higher priority than all law enforcement activities related to cannabis offenses. We're hearing a lot about mental health and a lot about our first responders who are being traumatized, and seeing statistics of more people jumping off buildings, horrible crimes, stabbings. That's what our law enforcement should be focusing on. That's what makes you heroes, when you deal with our society and treat people with respect. But when it comes to marijuana law enforcement, it's not respectable, and that's why the law is supposed to be changing. I was arrested for the first time ever myself in this city by the Toronto Police. I'm out on bail, but now a resident of your city as per my bail conditions, and I'm very happy to be a resident of Toronto. It's a beautiful city. It's a wonderful place. It's so diverse, and there's so much going on, but it makes me so sad to see raid after raid of dispensaries when alcohol dispensaries called restaurants and bars They contribute to increases in violence and sexual assault and all sorts of violence on our streets that impact individuals and society at large. I know police dread the weekend because they're going to have to deal with a lot of drunken people causing harm to themselves and others. But they know, and it's a joke amongst everybody, that, oh, I hope I get a stoner. The most they're going to do harm to is a bag of Doritos. And in Seattle, the Toronto police gave out bags of Doritos at Seattle Hemp Fest with a little notice saying, we're not going to arrest you. And it was wonderful to be on good terms with the police. And I want that. I want that for you so desperately. I'm tired of seeing this hate and anger towards law enforcement when we should be trying to build more respect. So when we talk about how much money is spent and time and resources on marijuana, it's not just the possession arrests, which are completely unjustified. It's not just the growers and the patients and the dispensaries. But why don't we consider, instead of your next dispensary raids, because they happen every week, what if you designated that money? It's tens of thousands of dollars per raid. But what if you announced to the public, in the interest of public safety and in our law enforcement officers, let's use this marijuana raid money for mental health initiatives for our frontline officers. Yeah! Why don't we give more money towards law enforcement who are dealing with actual crimes, with actual victims and real harm and real trauma, rather than forcing the police to have to go into dispensaries in Kensington Village and other places and to have to cower away with money and cannabis that is really should be benefiting society. So marijuana law enforcement does more harm than good. And in order to bring more respect towards law enforcement, the police board, please consider lowest law enforcement priority. It may not be something the board can do. It might be something the city needs to do, but you can announce that police will make sure that if there's anything else other than a cannabis crime to investigate, that's the priority. And I promise you it will bring more respect to police and a more willingness to engage if we can just pass the peace pipe, stop busting people, and focus on helping our law enforcement and citizens in society who struggle with much greater dangers such as alcohol and hard drugs and all sorts of things that officers see every day. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Emery. Any questions for Ms. Emery? If not, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
And point taken, and the laws are changing, but that doesn't mean that nobody can be busted for doing something illegal with marijuana, because there are limits to what has been put in place right now. You know, you can only go so much. You cannot smoke and drive. So things of that nature will still be enforced. Okay, we'll carry on with our agenda. And because of the deputy not being able to be here on number 5 and 6 yet, we will carry on with item number 7. Oh, okay, sorry, we're not finished yet. Thank you, Mayor Tory. Now we go to question of staff. Councillor Carroll, Mayor Tory first, sorry. Mayor Tory?
I just had the one question that I indicated I would ask of the chief or his designate with respect to, Mr. Sewell mentioned a pilot project in 51 Division where we have a Crown signing off. I'm not sure how it works or what the purpose of it was. I don't know if I was here when it was instituted, but you know, is it, why was it done, and is it working, and is it achieving what it was intended to achieve?
Yes, it is working, and the reason why the Crown is embedded is strictly for diversion purposes. As you saw when our analysts went up and spoke about the number of mental health occurrences that we have, a lot of those occurrences also involve certain threshold criminal behavior. And rather than put people that have mental health issues through the judicial system, that Crown has the ability of diverting them through other programs so that we get the best solutions rather than a traditional, you know, put them in the trial system, and that's working fantastically.
So if it was chosen to do so, would it be an insurmountable task to take a look at the issue that Mr. Sewell raised and the Star article raised, which would be just to look at generally at marijuana arrests in that one division on the same kind of trial basis or whatever it is you call it, to see if there's anything that could be done with regard to those kinds of arrests, or would you not think that's advisable?
Well, I can tell you right now, I think maybe I need to get the message out a little bit louder and clearer, and I think you've heard me, Mr. Mayor, speak on several occasions, and the fact that I do not encourage my men and women to be arresting people for straight possession of marijuana in light of what is going to be taking place in the future. The trafficking piece is another completely different discussion, which you've all heard, and I'm sure due to time I'm not going to go through that again, but I'm not the least bit interested in straight possession of marijuana charges. So I need to take a look at exactly what the numbers are and what we're doing and what I can do to stop that from happening.
Final question, Mr. Chair. Is it possible we could get here, just as part of this, and it may be, I don't think it's buried in any of the stats that we see, what the statistics are in the last period of time with respect to marijuana arrests generally, so that we would see whether there are as many happening at all. And then I don't know whether we have the ability, as the Star obviously did, to track whether the pattern, and it is a disturbing pattern that is in their article, has continued, even with what I expect will be a reduced number of marijuana arrests. Can you provide that to us?
I will look into that, and definitely, my primary goal is to find out the root cause. I do have concerns for this. I want to see what the cause may be, if I can determine that. Whether or not the training is translating to the frontline officers, whether or not there is proper and effective supervision so that we get it right, and then make those necessary changes.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Councillor Carroll.
Well, I'm taken back even after hearing this. My knee-jerk reaction when this was on the agenda first, we had to postpone it, but it was on the agenda last time, was to say, let's hear the concerns, and we have the research from the Star, but we also know, they admit themselves in their piece, that there are some impediments, because there are things we're not tracking, we should be tracking, and not the least of which is race-based tracking in terms of who gets detained, who has to await bail, all the rest. But also, is this symptomatic of something else? Is there do we also have a trend of under, having detained you for some other reason, we're now throwing the book at you with whatever might stick, and net widening in fact. So for us to come up with specific recommendations about how that would change is really policy on the fly. So I'm wondering, because we are concerned, we do acknowledge the problem that's been brought to our attention. I'm wondering if what we should simply do is refer this to the chief and his staff, asking them to report back, first commenting on their own comments on what it says in the Star, and proposing solutions, including commenting on the solutions suggested by the community and others that they may know of that would be effective in getting to the bottom of whether or not we have profiling that is defensible, if in fact that can ever be. But by allowing them first to report on this, their take on the article and review of solutions, I think we will be starting down a path that we need to, nevertheless, because I think with legalization is going to come a huge amount of misinformation and misunderstanding anyway, and we want people to know what is still applicable and what our approach will be. So I think starting this work is not opening up a can that isn't going to need to be opened up anyway, and urgently.
So while you're crafting your motion, can I get the chief to comment?
Yeah, anything that will enhance transparency and accountability, I agree with. I just want to make sure that the board understands that we stay in our lane. And when I say that, the report speaks of the judicial system. It speaks to bail. It speaks to incarceration and other factors as well, too. So in crafting whatever resolution or whatever you're going to be asking, I just request that it is put within the parameters of our responsibilities.
Thank you. And Councillor Carroll is going to be writing up something to refer to the chief for report back so that we can get it right. So while we're doing that, I will send this down and go on to the next item, unless anybody else wants to speak to this or ask questions. Or your new deputant? Actually, sorry, we made a rule. We did make a rule that deputants have to register. You have to register. Yeah.
All of you are smarter than I am, and I got this.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be smarter than all of us in this room. And you've been lobbied by Kim Terry, and you've been lobbied by Hill and Knowlton Solutions, and you know it.
Yeah.
On behalf of policy, it's not policy on the fly. It's pay for play. It's cash for access. And it's disappointing to watch you use the loyalty of your police force, and like Jodie Emery said, force them to arrest people that they know deep down they don't want to be arrested. And they're the ones who have to.
Thank you.
They're the ones who have to have neighborhoods stare at them.
Thank you.
None of you
Yeah.
do. John Tory.
I think we need to see. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we are skipping 5 and 6 right now. We come back to it later. Item number 7. We do have a deputy on it, the response on jury recommendation from the coroner's inquest into the death of Mr. and David
We're going to wait
Andrew.
for the Dion. Yeah.
Deputation is by Miss Melissa Graham. Is Miss Melissa Graham here? Melissa Graham. Final call for Melissa Graham. So there is, Ms. Graham is not here, so does anybody want to ask questions of staff? Does anybody want to speak? If not, can we have a motion to take staff recommendation? Mayor Tory, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. And then we have going on to item number 9. And that is Special Constables, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, increase in approved strength. Again, Ms. Graham.